Hi, and welcome to tonight's live webinar from musictechstudent.co.uk. Tonight we're going to be discussing teaching task 1A. This one is going to throw your students a little bit of a wobbly because if your students are anything like mine, a lot of them, this is the first time that they've actually touched music tech and had to do a massive production task. So it's quite daunting for them, and you're going to have to bear with them while they kind of learn the ins and outs of this. Okay, so before we get started, just a bit of a kind of pitch for what we've been doing on Music Tech this week. So we're still working on the Task 1A course, which is going really well. We've got a few of the extra parts in this week. I think I've done 3 this week. Lesson plans, we've got a new lesson plan. So setting up the recording studio should be quite an interesting one. So go and check that out. What else have we been doing? More quizzes. Like I said, we're not quite ready to chuck them out there yet, but in a couple of weeks we'll start filtering them through, ready for all your hard preparation for the exam and all your students' hard preparation for the exam. Okay, so breaking this down, we're going to look at the marking scheme. We're going to look at any kind of pitfalls that your students might come across. It's really important that you kind of walk them through the marking scheme, just kind of talk them through how to get the marks, where the down points might be, and what else. The other thing, time management. Time management's a massive issue in music tech, and if you get it wrong, it can be fatal. I think I've said this in the last couple of webinars, and the way I used to do the course when I first started didn't leave much room for task 1C. So it's really important that as soon as you get the specification, which is already out, of course, you get cracking with task 1A, but you get them started in the right way. It's so important. If they start all on their own, and with no guidance from you on actually how to set up a project, you're going to quickly find that you're going to have to backtrack a lot. Okay, so we're just going to walk through some of these time management issues that you might face. What the students need to know before they start the course. I always spend the first 2, possibly 3 weeks just getting them up to speed. So I'll use task 1B to get most of that done, plus a couple of other things. I've published a Creating Music for Film Flipped Learning course on musictechstudent.co.uk, and it's completely free. Guide your students over to it and give them that to do for the first few weeks. And that'll really get them up to speed. It'll get their creative juices flowing. It'll get them understanding how the workflow of Logic in particular works, but it could be applied to Cubase or Pro Tools, anything you like. We're going to then take a little look at the logbook, and finally we'll finish off with the Q&A and see if anyone pops in to see us and have a little chat. Okay, so the mark scheme. I've preloaded the mark scheme in a minute, but we're just going to go through how I perceive this as being broken down. Now, the first 50% of the marks are all about pitch, rhythm, and timbre. The students need to hit this on the head. A few of the problems that mine have, and me entirely as well, I don't always hear this when I'm listening to the track, but they miss out on octaves, they miss out on grace notes, they miss out on little harmonies that are happening, any kind of slurs, pitch bends, rhythm kind of inaccuracies. And you're going to lose a lot of marks if you don't nail down these finite things. You're going to lose a lot of marks. So it's one of the things I tend to do a lot of work with, and I always get my head of music in as well, and he'll look over it and kind of guide us through it where the score might be lacking a little bit, and guide us through kind of how this could be improved. So when broken down like that, you're going to see that you're going to push yourself right up into the good boundaries of a D+ if you just get those 3 things sorted. The next area is mixing, looking at the balance of the individual tracks, looking at the panning, looking at the dynamics and the quality of the input. These make up 30%, and it's kind of common ground. So mixing will happen in task 1A, task 1B and task 1C. So this is something that you should be eking into their psyche about how the workflow of a producer or a mixing engineer works, just by getting those basic things sorted. Remembering not to miss out on any automation that might be happening. And then finally, the one that my students always struggle at, especially the ones that aren't particularly musical, is the musicianship. Style and creativity, articulation and phrasing. This makes up 20%, but it can mean the difference between a C, a B or an A. if you get this wrong. And the articulation, if you've inputted this manually, you have to do a lot of work for this. You have to kind of sculpt and shape the notes just to kind of get the most out of it. Common pitfalls. Let me just switch my screens over here and show you the mark scheme. Just give me 2 seconds to set this one up. Okay, so here we go. The mark scheme. Let me pull this into another window so I can see it. Okay, look for common pitfalls. When the examiner and when you and your students are going through this, you're going to need to know that there are 2 sets of marking. There's the holistic and then there's the detailed. You want to show this to your students and show them the pitfalls. In the holistic, you'll notice down here somewhere where it says heavily outweighed by errors, misjudgments. If this is the case, they can't get past 5 marks. Insufficient work has been submitted. You can't get past 5 minutes. If the length of the piece doesn't match the length of the actual recording that they're asking you to submit, you can't get past 5 marks. So, you know, when you're giving them an idea of the mark that they're getting, make sure you point this out to them. Look, so I can't mark this until you've got the whole sequence in place. So basically, if you've got the whole score in place and it's inputted correctly, they can move on to the next set of bands. The examiner will go through it like this. They will go, okay, we'll start with the bottom band. Have they met this? Then they'll move through the limited. Have they met this? And so on. So just look at the kind of elements that they're going to be missing out on. I tend to go through the detailed mark scheme first and then the holistic. However, this can give them a distorted view of the whole thing, because what they've got to know is they may have scored 25 for the detailed, but if they don't meet some of these little pitfalls, they can't get past 5. So, you know, make them very aware of that. This is why they're being marked in such a way, okay? Because the examiner will go through that and they'll say, okay, what's the detail? Okay, it's 25. Okay, but on the holistic, does that descriptor of 25, this competent, meet the work that they've actually been doing? If not, then they'll start looking into the adequate band, and they'll find the pitfalls, and it's, you know, you have to point that out to the students. As said previously, rhythm and pitch make up the bulk of these marks. So you just need to make them very aware, get the score in, make sure the note input is correct. You know, if they're not confident with using the piano roll, get them using things like Note Flight and Sibelius, just so it is almost identical. There are no disadvantages really these days in using Sibelius or Note Flight as the initial input into using the piano roll. A lot of it can still be manipulated afterwards. But the one thing it does guarantee is that the notes are right, and you can see that this particular task, la la la, is they've got to be very aware of the key signature as well. So putting in a Note Flight guarantees almost that the key signature is going to be absolutely spot on. So does make sense. So here's the mark scheme. You can find this mark scheme on the overview of Music Tech on the actual musictechstudent.co.uk website. If you have any trouble finding that and you want a copy of this, just give us a shout and I'll link it to this video. Okay, so here we go. So holistic and detailed. We've gone through all these. Walk your students through this. There's no harm in showing your students how these things will get marked. Okay, I think I need to move back to the presentation. I think you guys are okay with that. Once again, if you've got any questions, just throw them away at the end and we'll go back to it. Okay, so that's the mark scheme. Time management. You really need to give yourself a limited time for this. You want to be saying to your students, okay, by Christmas the whole sequence needs to be inputted and almost done, okay? Because at the same time you're going to be working on the other projects as well. So it's important that you get them started properly. As a teacher, if you are a new teacher, this really applies to you. If you're an old teacher, you know, if you've been teaching it for a little while, you're going to be doing this as part of your routine. There is no harm in you actually doing this task yourself. The benefit of doing this task yourself is you get to see where all the pitfalls are, and you can feed that back to your students. There's no harm in that. I had a question this week from one of the users of the site. who said, you know, you've created this lovely music tech course for task 1A, but is it okay for my students to use it? You know, am I breaking any exam rules? Now, I would never do that. You know, you're never going to break the exam rules by using my resources. I will never give you master copies. I'll never give you files that the students can directly input. But all the course that I've been doing so far is exactly how I would deliver it to my students. So, you know, get stuck in, give them this workflow that they can actually maximize their time. It seems obvious, but just getting them to lay out, like here, the actual structure of the song, so that just saves so much time. So they're not all looking through the piece going, is this the verse? Is this the chorus? Whereabouts am I? They can, quick reference, it's color coded, wham, there I am. Second bit, get the track into the actual sequence, you know, get the actual tempo right as well, and they've got quick reference to how their timbres are shaping up. You know, and I always say to them, they say, "Oh, sir, does this sound right?" And my first thing to them is, you know, have you looked at the balance? Have you looked at the panning? Is it almost identical to what you're hearing? You've got the reference track there, you've got the score, so it should be fairly easy to kind of start shaping that. But back to my original point before I went off on one, it's really important that you get them started in the right way. There is no harm in you doing this task for yourself, feeding back some of the information, some of the pitfalls that you've discovered. Okay. Articulation phrasing. Once again, my students always lose so many marks on this one, and this is really what's going to push them into that next area. For those that are able to play the parts in, they're going to be a lot more adequate to kind of getting those extra marks, because a lot of the pitch bending they can do live, and it always sounds better if you've got a keyboard player in your class that really understands how to manipulate the pitch bend and how to manipulate the sustain and all the other kind of elements of keyboard playing, and has a really good timing. They're always going to score that much better in many respects than someone that types it in, because a lot of the hard work that comes with typing it in, getting the expressions right, getting those kind of pitch bends right, it is completely gone, and getting the note velocities right, and also sculpting the notes away from the grid as well. So often you'll hear me talk about the grid, and we're so fluent on that everything must fit to the grid, but sometimes there has to be a little bit of pull and push to the rhythm to kind of make it less mechanical, make it more human, if you like, or live, or whatever. Fortunately, this year's task has mostly been sequence, which is quite nice. The one part that I did find, the electric piano one, which I've got up here, which I'm just working through now in the course, is probably the only part that I've heard so far that is a live part. So, you know, get them to play in the padded chords of the electric piano. It's fantastic. That being said, of course, I'm sure that a lot more of the parts are played in live, but it does tend to feel more sequenced than tracks of the past. So, articulation, phrasing, making sure that the students manipulate the velocities of each of the individual notes, making sure that they're aware that if it sounds too mechanical, they need to shape them. Even as simple as if they've got a crotchet note, just shortening it. You know, if it needs to be a bit more punchy, shorten it. If it needs to kind of go a bit longer, make it go a bit longer, so that each note isn't kind of symmetrical and kind of just so. The logbook, this one always comes up, and we'll take up to the logbook in a second. And every year people say to me, "Oh, how do you fill in question 2 of the logbook? It's such a mammoth task." And it's true, there is a lot to fill in. They only give you a page. So how I tend to get my students to do it is, we'll start on a Word document, and we tend to always attach the Word document rather than use the page provided, because they'll normally go into 1.5, 2 pages. And I just get them to list in the Word document, get them to list each of the instruments in order, and then just give a brief description of how they've kind of manipulated. Roughly no more than a paragraph is needed for this. And as you can see from the description I put there, I basically indicated the preset that they started with, the instrument that they're using, so in this case the ES2, and then any kind of manipulation they've done. So if they've changed the kind of ADSR shape of the envelope, then just put that in, explain what that's done to the sound. If they've done shaping in terms of automation of panning, they put a little bit of description about that. It doesn't hurt to guide the examiner to what you have done, especially if it's accurate and right, you know. But I would say that's worked really well for us in the last few years, is to get them to open up a Word document, list out all of the instruments, and just write one paragraph about each and the way that that is shaped. So, I mean, I always use this particular example here that I've got in front of you to kind of, you know, solidify that, if you like. But, you know, don't be afraid to talk about effects. Don't be afraid to talk about panning, how you balance the piece, any contrast that there might be. That's the identifying. There's no marks for that, but it will kind of help reinforce your thinking behind why you've come up with these. And it also shows the examiner that you haven't just used presets. You've kind of gone above and beyond on that. Q&A. Okay, so my first aim for this, if you want to come in and have a chat, please do. I'm going to be around for a few more minutes, and I'll stay around if people come in. I was going to get my Logic score up, and I've done some testing before the show, and unfortunately the actual sound doesn't work. For some reason Google Hangouts doesn't allow me to have two inputs, so it's going to be quite difficult to kind of give you sound. But what I'm going to do is go over to Logic now and just show you some of the expression, show you some of the shaping that your students can do using MIDI controllers and things like that. Okay, once again, if you want to come in, if you want to press the live call button, come and have a chat, or send us a message in some way, then please do so. You know, we're just trying to get everyone involved here. If you've got questions, and also if you've got questions and you don't want to get involved in the show, just send me an email, and I'll voice it on the show next week. So let's go over to my Logic screen. Where are you, Logic? Oops. It's coming, it's coming. Okay, so this is my Logic screen. As said before, we're just I'm going through each of the individual parts and I'm inputting it. This is the score, and everything I've done for this course so far is as I would have done if I was teaching to my students. Okay, so there's no kind of indifference here. This is what I would do. I would always go into the actual sequence and do it for myself. There's no better reference point than if you do it for yourself. Absolutely zero. You know, it's all very well turning around to students, oh, go on, get on with it, crack on. But they will always turn around, oh, sir, but what about this? Oh, sir, what about this? And you need to be prepared for those questions, but also you need to preempt them early so that they don't waste time on things that actually are out of their capabilities. So let me just come into one of these parts. I've only just started this electric piano, so I'm just going to come in here. Now, the electric piano on the piece is a live piece, so I would say to your students, why not have a go at playing the piano in? They are padded chords, and all I would do is set up a looped area. Okay, so okay, you can't play the whole sequence, that's fine. Why don't you play one chord at a time, or play a couple of chords at a time, and then you come in and edit it, and it just gives it that real feel. Because I mean, you can tell that this has been inputted by me rather than played in. But if this was played in, you would have the velocity across all four of those notes, and it would just give it that nice sound that you would be expecting. Now, I talked earlier about shaping these things. One of the first things that I would do is look at these, and you're going to need this when you get to the vocal part. You're going to need to do this a lot. Okay, if they're actually physically typing all the notes, and you're going to have to do this, it's worth kind of getting them into the habit of shaping their notes. So the first thing I would do is have a look at things like this. So straight away it said it was a semi-breve, and I've just taken it shorter than that, so just make it a bit more stabby, you know. And you can obviously keep playing around with this until you get it right. There's no harm in shortening them. The other thing, if you don't want the groove to be completely accurate, and for instance, I wouldn't necessarily advise this on beat 1, but say for instance you had a bar of crotchets, for instance, and you copy them over. So let's just copy a few of these over, and you can notice I'm not actually putting them on the grid. Okay, I need to do a bit more shaping, but I've just put them slightly after the grid, and it's just going to give that kind of swing, that easy feel. Okay, whereas if you go before the grid, so you know, obviously keep beat 1 on the beat, but if you go just before the grid, you're going to give it more of a rigid feel. But it still takes it away from the mechanicness of it. Now, I wouldn't advise going too much. As you can see, if I zoom in, there's the grid, and you can see that that's not even a semiquaver. It's not. It's a millisecond, if that. But it will give that easy feel. It will give that more live feel. So that's one thing you can do. Shaping the notes, making them longer, making them shorter, pulling them off the grid. Always have beat 1 as your reference where it's solid, and then just do whatever you need to do inside of that. So that's one thing you can do. The next thing you can do, and I keep coming back to this, is velocity. Come up to your velocity tool and reshape the notes as appropriate, of course. Pull them up, pull them down. So obviously pulling them down makes it quieter, pulling them up makes them louder. Okay, let's just undo that. And you'll get a lot of expression from that. You'll get a lot of feel from that if you just kind of do that. The other thing is using the control lane. So if I bring up the control lane, I've got to find it on this thing. There it is. If I bring up the control lane, I've obviously got my velocity control, so I can show you that. Each of those notes has their own velocity. Okay. You can also do a few other things. If you want to do your pitch bend, you can actually draw in a pitch bend. You can obviously do this live as well if you want to use a bit of automation, but after you've done it live, you can obviously come in and edit it, which is quite nice. So come down to pitch bend, and you can just come to your drawing tool, the pencil tool, and you can just draw in a nice pitch bend, take it back to 0 so that it's as it was. And there you go, you've got yourself a nice little pitch bend. Unfortunately, I can't play this to you. I'll try. It sounds god-awful, but there you go, you've drawn it in, and if you don't like that, there's no harm in just getting them to reshape it. As long as the start point and end point is 0, it's always going the pitch bend's always going to come back to its default position. Okay. What else have you got? So I've showed you velocity, I've showed you pitch bend. The other one that should be used, especially if you've got brass parts, is expression. Now expression allows a note to get louder or quieter. Okay, so within an individual section, within an individual note, you can actually push those up. So if you've got like a trumpet part where you want it to get slightly louder or slightly quieter, that's one way of doing that. Obviously, you can also do that with the volume control as well. So, or automation volume control. But there's a few tips that they should definitely be playing around with there, okay, to get the expression right. And there are some really good tutorials that delve into this subject. And I'll try and post a few in this webinar, so you've got a few that you can actually go and reference. Okay. I think that kind of brings me to the end of what I wanted to show you for this particular task 1A. So let's go back to the final bit of the presentation, then see if anyone's come in to have a chat. Okay. There it is. Sorry guys, I'm just fussing around. There we go, we're back. So that kind of brings me to the end of my task 1A explanation. Feel free to check out the course that I've been delivering. Get your students to have a watch of them. The first 2 episodes of actually setting up the project I've opened up on YouTube, so you can just go and view them. Type in setting up la 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 task 1A and it should pop up there on YouTube. And there's no problem with that, but you should definitely get them to set up properly. It's going to save you a mountain of time later on, okay? So feel free to go and check out those videos. This week we're going to have a bunch more content coming through, so we're going to try and do another lesson plan, or maybe 2 hopefully. And I keep promising 2, but 1 seems to be my limit at the minute. And I'm hoping to get most of the score inputted by next week. So my students will be happy, and I'm sure your guys will be ecstatic. Feel free to drop me a line. Twitter, Google, Facebook, email. Newsletter's not quite ready yet. I'm going to apologise for that. I'm putting a coming sign logo up because it's unlikely to be ready now before Christmas. I'm just prioritising content first. Hopefully next week Sam should have the task 3A score done. So the first one of those should be done, and we should be able to roll that out to all you A2 students. Next week, what is our webinar for next week? I can't remember. Go and check the webinar page under the teachers area to find out what the next one is. I think it might be task 1. Sorry, I think it's task 3A next week. So hopefully that coincides with Sam bringing out the score, so we can have a little look through that. Okay then, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. Drop us a line if you want me to discuss anything with you guys, or if there's anything you're unsure about, and we'll go from there.